Hi all, I have an absolutely thrilling game to show you today. Leela against Shredder 13. This is in the ChessCon Blitz battle, 5 minutes with a 2-second increment. Stage 2, 2018. So in this game, the opening book given the first 6 ply e4, e6, the French defense. So Leela playing white scores well against the French defense generally. d4, d5. Knight d2, and we have the Guimard mainline, which is knight c6. This is in Watson's Dangerous Weapons in the French book, which I really enjoyed playing and experimenting with some interesting results. So knight c6, what does Leela do here? Knight g f3, knight f6, e5, knight fd7, and now the move knight b3. This is actually very popular in over-the-board chess, so reinforcing the d4 square. a5, as though a4 is incoming as a threat. That's actually stopped with a4. b6, and then we have h4, and it looks as though one plan might be to try and exchange off the bishops. That has been played before, but in this game actually also the most popular seems to be bishop b7. In fact, after bishop a6, white would still have a small advantage, even though this might seem strategically beneficial. There are other things going on in the position here. White's got a good space advantage, so this is still a small advantage for white. So anyway, bishop b7, we have c3, knight a7, making way for c5 to try and at least put some pressure on the d4 pawn, on white's center generally. h5, the dreaded form pawn, is actually now threatened. c5, h6, and in fact, yes, we have a form pawn. So what's the significance of this pawn here? Bishop e2, bishop e7, white castles, black castles, bishop e3. We have queen c7, rook e1, rook a e8, and now knight g5. And this looks as though this is difficult to kick because of knight takes e6. You know, if f6, then just knight takes e6. But what is it actually doing there? Surely it's not about f4, because there's no f5 possibility. In fact, this is revealed now. The idea is bishop g4 to look at e6. Bishop a6. Is it worth it? Is it worth sacrificing on e6? Well, Leela does actually play bishop takes e6 here. So black plays f takes, knight takes, and is technically getting 2 pieces for the rook, but it's for 2 pawns, so it's an interesting trade-off for both sides. Rook takes f8 here. What's the advantage of taking out black's e6 pawn? Well, this pawn is now liberated. It can actually move forward, and it does so here. In fact, it is actually possible to do this. If queen takes e6, then there's bishop g5, and we see a double attack, well, double pressure on e7. And it doesn't matter about f2 here. White can take on e7 and hit the knight, actually. So taking there, take the knight. And taking on f2, there's no check or anything, so that's fine for white, big advantage. So interesting that this pawn can't be taken. What does that actually mean for black after knight f6? There's a kind of weakness of the last move here. There's less support for c5, which actually means now d takes c5 is slightly awkward for black. Well, first of all, there's frontal pressure on d5, but the bigger point immediately is this a5 pawn. So that's being attacked by the knight on b3. So we see b takes, and now knight takes a5, getting that pawn. Now here, queen b6, which looks to be going straight into a pin. Again, if queen takes e6, by the way, there's nasty things like bishop takes c5 hitting the queen. And here, bishop takes, and it's a disaster. Queen takes d5 check. And then white can just take the queen and take the knight, big advantage. So, okay, queen b6 runs into b4, d4. And now this is the really curious part of the game. Really curious. Bishop g5 was played, and this sets up this pawn to be in motion yet again, potentially with any bishop takes f6, sometimes e7, and that would trigger, for example, diagonal checks, etc., being dangerous. Now black here plays d3. Some very, very interesting variations indeed here. If d takes, it seems as though b5 is very strong, not with the idea that you might think of just taking on a6, but first bishop takes f6, and if bishop takes, e7. And the reason why this is crushing with a pawn on e7 is this check going into f7, and you can see that all of these pieces are just spectator pieces here. This is just a nightmare. The form pawn with the queen here is absolutely crushing, and in fact the engine suggestion is queen d8, which doesn't look very healthy, so after taking its mate. So that's just one of the many incredible lines here. Let's have a look at this. b5, queen takes. Look at it again. So bishop takes. Now if the pawn wants to be blockaded still with rook takes, then in fact queen d7 here, knight c8, this is really strong. This continuation, white ends up scooping up a lot of pieces basically with the exchange up here, big advantage. So let's have a look at this again. Fascinating. Bishop g5, what can happen here? So on c takes b4, let's have a look at c takes b4 here. Bishop takes, and again e7, and look, we've got this killer check again with queen f7, infiltration again. If that's the best move, that doesn't look very good. Yeah, checkmate. Yeah, there's another line here with let's have a look at bishop takes rook takes f6 in this line, queen takes d4. This is very good for white. Yeah, the queen is actually protecting f2 from there. So this line is fascinating. Yep, check, rook takes e7, and even though black's a bishop up, this is just a nightmare for king safety. Black would have to give up the queen there to stop being mated and stuff. So big advantage for white. So in all of these lines, it seems, black is absolutely worse. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. Check out the pinned comment for all these variations. So black tries d3, and this just gets really wild now, this game. Leela just plays b5. Now, why play b5? Why not, why give up the knight? Well, if the knight actually moved here, I mean, this looks plausible, knight b3, then black is worse, but Leela has lost a nice pawn chain. Look at this position and compare and contrast. The pawn chain is gone. It looks as though it has less soul, this position, in terms of the pawn structure. The pawns are the soul of chess. Well, it might be technically better, but it doesn't seem as visually crushing as what was played, which was b5, giving up that knight, and now just queen takes d3, believe it or not. So getting yet another pawn. Leela is collecting pawns in this game, it seems. A little bit as priority over pieces sometimes, giving up that knight for this black centre pawn here. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 pawns against just 3 pawns now. But black has some extra bits. We have bishop c8. Giving back a piece for a couple of pawns isn't so clever here. This position is very, very nice for white. Black is really on the back foot here. For example, this variation, yeah, f3, and it just looks like a big advantage for white. Black's pretty paralysed. This form pawn is playing a huge role here in things. So knight takes or bishop takes. Here's a variation cooked up earlier. And it seems as though, again, white is a lot better in this variation. It's just getting back material, in fact. So after bishop c8, look at this situation with the pawn chain, especially on the queen side. It looks very, very cozy and attractive after c4. So reinforcing this queenside pawn chain, it's just wonderful stuff. Instead of the other variation, it just looks a lot cozier. Looks, Philidor would be proud. Basically, the pawns are the soul of chess, as Philidor said, the great French player. So king h8 was played. On rook e8, let's say queen g3, this variation with queen e5, the queen bouncing around. And it seems as though the pawns can play a big role. And this kind of scenario is a disaster for black. Black's just getting run over, basically. This is an attractive tactical idea in this variation. And white ends up getting all material back with interest. Now on queen c7, then look at this pressure with the form pawn, kind of nearly virtually pinning the knight to g7. b6 here, and the queen's overloaded. And this is just a disaster for black. Look at the pressure. Just building and getting another pawn just for fun. This is absolutely crushing stuff. These variations absolutely wonderful, and this is another way of celebrating connected pass pawns in the centre. This variation, yeah, there's nothing meaningful for black to do here. The queen's potentially coming back on any checks to h3. So white's got a big advantage there. So we have actually king h8, queen g3 here, and this gets to have a feel of an Alphazero game, what's going on here with this white queen. Watch this white queen. It's completely remarkable. King g8, white play here. What would you play? Okay. I'm not going to leave this quiz too long because it's a little bit weird. Queen b8 was played. A lot of pressure is on black here, so the queen can't move because of the knight. The bishop can't take on e6. The rook ends up moving. The bishop can't take on e6 because of queen e5. So, for example, here queen takes e7 with a big advantage. So the rook ends up moving to e8. And now rook ad1. And in fact, black seems to be in some sort of horrible zugzwang. It just looks as though this is very, very bad news. If taking, there's things like rook a1, for example. So black took on e6. And this essentially gives back a piece. Although it's hitting the queen, yeah, queen e5 here is still winning a piece because it's hitting e6, of course, and f6. So bishop f7 now winning back a piece. Bishop f8. Is there a problem here with this coordination on e1? No. White's plan defend e1. The only move and best move, queen a1. Yeah, just defending e1 like this, giving enough support. So we have rook takes, rook takes. Finally, the form pawn is removed though. Rook d1. But look at this, there's going to be a replacement for that form pawn in the form of a gigantic pin. Now rook d8 as black's punishment. Queen c7, and now these pawns are starting to roll. a5, knight c8. It's pawns versus pieces in this game. b6, and black is getting fed up here and plays knight takes b6, snapping off two pawns. A takes, but is it too little too late? Well, it kind of is. Bishop e7, just losing even more material. It's really over now. Yeah, black's just been run over basically in this game and gives up the queen. The rest is not that hard with this big material advantage. Scooping up that pawn does lose Does Leela do a bit of trolling or not? Well, let's see. Okay, g4 here, f3, bishop f6, and now, yep, queen takes g6 trying to distract the bishop from c8. There is a little bit of trolling there. Okay, under promoting a rook, giving up the pawn. But now it's definitely a table-based win, for sure. It's certainty of the table-based win. Checkmate. So a really fascinating, visually stunning game to make Fuzhou proud. If you enjoyed this game video, then please click on the top left box, which should appear shortly, to become a member at chessworld.net. And you can play against other YouTubers. You can also check out all my analysis on the Improve menu, Learn from the Masters. If you click on YouTube Order, and sometimes I'll edit and update the analysis there of these games. Okay, comments, questions, like, shares, subscribes with the bell, all appreciated. Thanks so much.